Hi, and welcome to That Was the Week That Was, week 32 of 2023, where I review some interesting current events of the last week with Vince McLeod of the Alternative Centre. Hey, how are you today, Vince?
G'day, Bob, and g'day, Internet. I'm doing very well today. Every week that passes proves the Alternative Centre has been correct about just about everything so far this year, so I'm glad to see another win.
Yeah, it is awesome. We are really making headway with our predictions, aren't we? So let's
doing well. We're doing well.
Yes, we're doing well. Let's just jump into this week. On the 3rd of August, local and federal officials raided an illegal laboratory in Reedley, California, which was run by a Chinese company. The laboratory was apparently bioengineering mice to carry and transmit COVID-19, HIV, herpes, and malaria without permits or safety protocols. Do we know yet if this was a case of legitimate or malicious research?
No, we don't know yet, and I don't believe that we ever will. This, I think, is very possibly a case of a propaganda case. It's known that the Western establishment has an interest in fomenting war with China. They have an interest in manufacturing consent among the population for a war against China. And I suspect that this case is more propaganda along those lines. It could be true. It's true that the United States, for example, had biolabs doing similar kinds of research in Ukraine. So it's very possible that the Chinese government has sponsored similar kinds of research in California. But I don't believe that we'll ever know the exact truth about this. I think the real question we ought to ask is who benefits from this information being pushed in the public sphere.
Yes. Well, there are many unanswered questions about the nature of this illegal laboratory, about the identity of the Chinese company behind it, and about the potential risks and consequences for American science and public health. How do you think that the U.S. government and the scientific community should respond to this incident?
The U.S. government wants to be very careful. If it's true that Chinese government does have some operatives in California that are producing biological weapons intended to target the American population, they ought to be very concerned. I think that's a very real risk, unfortunately, at this stage of scientific development in the world in 2023. So far as the American government, they might be interested in investing some more time and money and energy into counterintelligence, especially when it comes to counterintelligence of potential information leaks among university researchers.
Well, as you say, it's going to be interesting to watch and see that unfold. Last week in Australia, representatives from Pfizer and Moderna claimed that no one was forced to take the COVID-19 vaccine. But the facts are that pressure and coercion were placed on workers to comply with the medical intervention that they may not have wanted. It appears that the executives are arguing that this was not forcing, but was rather a reasonable and lawful condition of employment aimed to protect the health and the safety in the workplace and the society. What's your take on it, Vince?
What the employers did may have been lawful, but I don't know if it was reasonable to make somebody get an experimental vaccine, which everybody knows has only been under development for a short amount of time, much shorter time than the average vaccine, and say that if a person doesn't take this experimental vaccine, then they're going to get fired. I don't think people realize that if you are living paycheck to paycheck, like most people are nowadays, you can't exactly just simply get fired and then easily bounce back and get to the same position that you were without risking becoming homeless or worse, ending up in prison or a mental institution. So I don't think it was at all a reasonable thing to push on people. I think now that the public opinion has turned on coronavirus vaccines and now it's not very popular anymore, people are starting to realize that they're trying to escape responsibility and they're passing the buck. And I think that's what the executives here are doing in this case, just passing blame.
Yeah, right. Well, they both, Moderna and Pfizer, both initially reported high levels of effectiveness for their vaccines in preventing symptomatic COVID-19, severe disease, hospitalization, and death. However, the recent studies have shown that this assertion did not stand up to scrutiny. How do you explain this discrepancy between their claims and the evidence, and what implications does that have for the vaccine strategy?
It's a simple explanation. Moderna and Pfizer simply wanted to make money, and so they wanted to create the impression that their vaccines were necessary for public survival. And they did create that impression. They ended up, knowingly or otherwise, producing falsified results that suggested that the vaccines were necessary. And then it turns out they perhaps weren't so necessary, which leads to the second question, what implications it has for the vaccination strategy. I think it's made all vaccination strategies are going to be a lot more difficult to put into place in any Western country in the future, because people are going to think about the coronavirus. They're going to think to themselves, I'm not sure if this vaccine is necessary or if it's just being pushed on me for the sake of the profit of pharmaceutical companies. So I think the Moderna and Pfizer have done the whole world a great disservice in their greed, their drive for profit against all other considerations, and they've really done a lot of damage to public health by making people suspicious about vaccination.
Mm-hmm. Undermining public trust. Yes.
Exactly.
Well, on Monday, New Zealand partnered with BlackRock, one of the world's biggest investment firms, to create a $2 billion climate infrastructure fund, which aims to support renewable energy projects and achieve 100% renewable electricity by 2030 in New Zealand. This deal is being seen as a game changer for the clean tech sector and an example of the pragmatic and practical steps that the government is taking to address climate change. However, BlackRock has also been accused of greenwashing its environmental credentials, as it still holds billions of dollars of shares in fossil fuels companies. How do you evaluate BlackRock's role and responsibility as a global leader in sustaining investing, given this apparent contradiction?
To me, it seems like BlackRock are just total hypocrites. BlackRock, they have $260 billion under investment in fossil fuel companies at the moment, and $91 billion of that is in Texas alone. Now, this is US dollars. $260 billion that they have under investment in fossil fuels. By comparison, the entire New Zealand economy is our GDP on an annual basis is about $240 billion US dollars. So that's an incredible amount of money just to have under investment in that one particular industry. So I think BlackRock really are just total hypocrites. They're out to make as much profit as they can in the short to medium term, and they're greenwashing. They're just virtue signaling.
Yeah. Right. Well, their owner, Larry Fink, is a proponent of conscientious capitalism, which is a business philosophy that aims to balance profit motives and social obligations. So what do you think are the benefits and the challenges of conscientious capitalism as a business philosophy, and how does it compare to other forms of capitalism, such as neoliberalism and social democracy?
The conscientious capitalism that we're seeing with BlackRock and Larry Fink, it really is just pure virtue signaling. You notice that they put a lot of effort into trying to coerce companies into being transsexual friendly, but they don't put any effort into making sure that companies can pay wages that workers can live on. Neither do they put any effort into housing, making sure that workers can be housed. It's all just superficial and populist issues. They just ride the waves of whatever's in the popular consciousness. So I don't think they are actually working to improve society or working to make things better in any sense. They're just pretty much virtue signaling for the sake of getting in line for making the most profits.
More greed.
More greed. I don't think that conscientious capitalism is really any different to neoliberalism, in the sense that both are really just about making as much money as possible in the short term and doing whatever you can to make it look like you're doing the right thing.
Mm. Okay, let's have a look at New Zealand. A new taxpayers union Curia poll here shows Labour crashing out of the running in the upcoming election, falling by 4 percentage points to 27.1%. What are the implications for New Zealanders of a change in government from Labour to National? And will it make a difference in terms of the policies and priorities that affect the lives of the common man, such as the housing crisis, the climate change challenge, and our relationship with China?
Many people are saying that New Zealand has really gotten a lot worse over the last 6 years, that the standard of living is now much lower than it was 6 years ago. Things are considerably tougher, and that's motivating a lot of people to want to switch from Labour to National. But unfortunately, the bad news is, the black pill that I have for people is that it's not significantly going to change anything. In fact, if National gets in, it's liable to make things worse. John Key, he imported 500,000 new people into New Zealand, and that's one of the main reasons why the house prices shot up during his term. Chris Luxon wants to do something similar. He's beholden to the same real estate interests, so he could very well import another 500,000, 600,000 people and make it much, much harder for the common man to find housing or wages that can buy anything meaningful. So unfortunately, I think the switch to National is mostly just going to make things harder for most people.
Goodness me. Well, if ACTA National can govern alone without needing New Zealand first as a coalition partner, do you think there's going to be any place for Winston Peters in the next Parliament? And what role or influence could he have on the political landscape?
There should be a big place for him in the next Parliament, because if Labour crashes out, as they're now doing, becoming extremely unpopular, it looks like the whole party's falling to pieces, and then an unpopular national government comes in and takes power, let's face it, Luxon's not going to be popular. He's already got very low approval ratings, and they're only going to go down. He's not even in power yet, so he hasn't done anything wrong yet, but his approval ratings are only going to go down. If that does happen, then Winston Peters will be able to position himself as effectively the leader of the opposition. He'll be able to say that he's a more effective opposition than the Labour Party is, and so he'll be able to potentially work towards his ultimate dream, which is having a New Zealand First Party that gets about 40 or 50 seats. I don't know if that's realistic, but I know that Winston Peters has never had a greater opportunity in the wider electoral cycle, and here I'm talking on the scale of 18, 20 years, to get a large number of seats than what he will get in the next Parliament if Chris Luxon gets in and is a weak leader.
Going to be so interesting.
Yeah, it'll be crazy.
Okay, so Vince, to finish off, how do you feel about those 3 party poopers who crashed that fancy dress contest in the Christchurch pub and threw a tantrum over some blackface costumes? Do you think that they need to light it up and get a sense of humour? Or do they have a point about the dark side of blackface?
They absolutely need to lighten up and get a sense of humour. The main thing that people need to remember is that slavery was commonplace here in New Zealand up until 1840, when colonisation began, and the British law came and took over. Once British law took over New Zealand, slavery was made illegal, and that was the first time that had been the case. Up until then, up until 1840, some 9 out of every 10 Maori people were slaves. So things were pretty grim up until British law came into place. And so I think we don't have to have those American-style narratives where we have to be ashamed about slavery and chattel slavery and so on. Those narratives aren't part of the New Zealand story. So I don't think we need to be ashamed in any way, and we should just have a laugh about it.
Yeah, Cool. Okay. Well, just one more question. Do you think that racism is the new weapon of mass destruction used to blast people who dare to disagree with the mainstream culture?
Absolutely, I do. And I think that's a function of the fact that we've got so much what I call race neurosis in society today. Race neurosis is a phenomenon. I wrote a chapter about that in my book, Clown World Chronicles. You can get on Amazon. That's when people are just really anxious to make sure that they don't say or do or even think anything that's politically incorrect when it comes to the topic of race. So I think, yeah, racism is a new weapon of mass destruction in the sense that it's very easy now to manipulate other people's thinking and to manipulate opinions by using the threat of racism or accusations of racism to make people shut their mouths. And we're seeing a lot of this all the time. And this blackface thing is just another example. Like they don't mention the fact that there are 20,000 homeless people in New Zealand. Apparently that's less of a concern than this blackface issue. So I personally think that's ridiculous, and it's really just more gutter media at work.
Yes, indeed. Well, we have come to the end of our time together tonight. So please, would you remember to like and subscribe and check out the description for the links of tonight's articles. Thanks very much for joining us. And Vince, what a week that was.
Yeah, cheers, Bob. Cheers, Internet. It was another crazy week. Things are getting more and more crazy, but I'm personally enjoying it as we build up towards the election and the American election next year. I think things are getting more and more exciting. I'm loving it.
The alt centre are clown world's good guys. They don't fit into boxes neatly enough to be someone else's tools.